and I am just grateful that all of you are here as well. And you can feel free to ask questions. I'll try to be following in the chat as well. And if you want to make comments, ask questions, I can try to follow along there as well. And I'll put up my PowerPoint here in a moment, but I think dealing with parents is the name of this class, but it's, you know, I think that can often sound kind of negative, right? You have got to deal with them. But it sometimes can be. In fact, some of the most challenging experiences I've actually had as a director were with parents. Often the kids are great, right? I mean, there's problems always, obviously, but many times it's parents that can cause challenges that we have to address. And I think this is why this is the name of the class, because most parents are going to be wonderful and supportive and amazing, but then there are some that are always going to be a challenge. And I think this became very apparent to me when I first became director. I was 24 years old. This was 15 years ago, so a long time ago, but I was young. I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. The Lord led and guided and everything, but I don't know how old you guys are, but I know many of you, at least perhaps some of you, are probably younger than the parents that you're going to be addressing. And that was at least my case, maybe not the case for all of you. But so I wanted to start off by reading from 1 Timothy 4. And he was a young pastor that Paul wrote this letter to encourage him. And he was probably younger than most of his church members. But it has principles, obviously, that I think are then played out through the rest of this discussion about parents. But this is 1 Timothy 4, starting in verse 12. Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. So those things are hard to do when you've got a difficult parent that you're addressing, that you're dealing with, but being an example in your speech, in your conduct, in your love, in your faith, in your purity. Until I come, Paul continues, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to exhortation, to teaching. So fortifying your mind with Scripture, spending time working with people rather than being frustrated with them. Verse 14, do not neglect the gift you have, which was given you by prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you. Practice these things, immerse yourself in them, so that all may see your progress. Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by so doing, you will save both yourself and your hearers. And I think this is just really crucial. Our example is one of the most important things that we can think of. So even though the title is dealing with parents, I kind of prefer something not quite so that way, right? But maybe just interacting with parents. How do we address some of the challenges that come up? So I'm going to share my screen here with you, and hopefully this will work. All right, so as Cheryl mentioned, I was a director for 13 years. And then when I got married, I stepped down from being director, but I was away for about a year, but I couldn't stay away from Pathfinders because I love it too much. And so now I'm back as a TLT director, and I'm really enjoying that. It's a little bit less responsibility, right? I mean, you have, but it's still just so much fun to see the kids and work with them, and facilitate and mentor them. And it's just really, really great to see some of them now becoming directors, etc. So as we think about interacting with parents, I think leadership becomes super important here. And I know you went through the class on leadership, but I thought it would just be helpful to maybe address some of these just in brief again here. Leadership is not about hierarchy and power, right? So even when you're addressing challenging parent things and issues, right, it's about servanthood, this servant leadership. Christ has given us this example in being a servant, and So rather than ordering people, right, we facilitate, we help others reach their goals, even parents, right? Because I think sometimes when kids do come from challenging family situations, you can even provide a model for parents. So it can go both ways in facilitating growth and improvement. So then again, we're also facilitators. It's again not about giving orders, but about building teams of people who can be positive influences on kids, even when they come from homes that are not ideal. Peacemaking. So our goal is not to be right, especially when parents are maybe arguing with us, but our goal is to bring peace. Maybe not even sometimes our own opinions, but how can we bring peace to the situation so we also help the kid to be safe? And then expect criticism. You know, I think this is going to happen. There's going to be some parents always who are probably not going to like you. I mean, this is just the reality of the situation of life, right? You are going to run into people who don't always like you. And how are you going to address that? And I think this is really important to think about, to expect criticism. It's going to come, but how are we going to deal with it? Are we going to fall under it, or are we going to embrace it and realize there are things we can learn from it, and to treat people well even in spite of it? And then to lead by example. So this is so important. I remember, I probably shared this story. Some of you have probably heard this before, but our club picks up trash. This is one of the service projects we do. We've adopted a road, and it's so important as a leader to model to the kids and the parents who are dropping off their kids that you guys are excited about doing what you're doing. It's not a chore, it's not an awful thing, but it's something that you can rejoice in together. And so your example makes a huge difference as you're interacting with parents. So being a good leader is one of the first important parts. If you gain the trust of the parents, of the kids, this is really crucial in then being able to address some of the challenging circumstances that you come across. So the first thing that I think is the most important as you're specifically dealing with parents addressing challenging issues is to try to avoid them by communicating well. So I find that many of the challenges that come are perhaps because we don't communicate enough or communicate well. People are confused, or they misunderstand something that you said, or you don't communicate with them about how well their child did, or how poorly their child is struggling, right? So this communication is I think one of the most crucial elements. And you know, this was something, not just sending an email, right, but communicating in as many possible ways. One of the things we do is we have our expectations for Pathfinders at the beginning of the year in my club. And so when I actually took over as director, you know, many years ago, I worked with the previous director. There were some expectations already, but we decided to make them positive. So we actually took our expectations for our club and we put them under the categories of the Pathfinder Pledge and Law, but not in a negative way, as in don't do this, but as in like, this is the type of person I will be. So rather than saying, you know, Pathfinders will not, you know, swear, we would say, you know, Pathfinders, you know, as a Pathfinder in this club, I will choose to have pure language and a focus on God in how I speak. And then we'd have a Bible verse that associates with that requirement, that expectation. And so every year at the beginning of Pathfinders, we actually go through these expectations with the kids. And sometimes we'll have, you know, the kids act them out, do a little skit to give an example of how these positive expectations are. And so this has been really helpful for us. And then we send home the list of expectations to the parents as well, so they understand them. And each kid has to sign at the bottom, and each parent has to sign at the bottom. So starting off the year, we try to communicate really clearly, these are our expectations, so that when we then do need to address a challenging issue with a child, the parent is already aware of the expectations and isn't surprised. And I think this is so important because sometimes if you're surprising a parent, they didn't know that that was an issue. And so it's important to be able to communicate. And then we also have it on, sometimes we'll send it out by an email as well, like as many possible ways as we can give these expectations. And then I also give expectations to parents, especially new parents, maybe parents who haven't had a kid in Pathfinders before. Sometimes I've done this written, but many times I do it in a just a face-to-face conversation. We talk about what Pathfinders is and what we're expecting of them, right? Because sometimes they don't know. They're either coming from adventurers where parents are much more heavily involved, or they've just never been in Pathfinders before. And so I think it's really important that we communicate with parents. What do we expect them to do? Drop their kid off, pick them up? Do we expect them to be there at a specific time? Do we expect them to bring something for their child? I will sometimes let a parent observe at least one Pathfinder session, but I try to keep it limited to that, 1 or 2, right? I want the child to also feel like this is their experience as a Pathfinder. So being able to communicate that to parents ahead of time, so again, they're not surprised at the last minute, is really important. And of course, schedule updates, you would expect this, right? But email, we use now email. We also put it on our Facebook group. We also text it out. So we have a texting program for our church that sends text to parents as well. So sometimes we'll call people if we can't, don't hear responses in other ways, but whatever way possible, trying to communicate in as many lines as possible with people. Another type of communication that I have found helpful, I don't do this all the time, but where it's needed to have a parent meeting. So we had a couple of them before Oshkosh. I've had parent meetings in the past where I'm dealing with an issue that they all have heard about and are misheard, or it was misrepresented, and so I have called a parent meetings to address all of negative concerns as well. So I maybe should have done these more than I did, but I didn't find them super necessary, but every now and then they are when you're dealing with a big issue. And some of you may have parent meetings more often than others. I don't think there's a right or wrong, but I think there is a place for that communication and a chance for them to ask questions itself, etc. Another thing that we have done in the past, we haven't done this in the last couple of years, I don't think, in our club, but we've done questionnaires about Pathfinders. So we send a questionnaire home with parents saying, asking questions about their child, positive questions, and, what is their personality like? What are things they like to do and help with? And what are some of their talents and skills and abilities? What are some concerns you have about them, etc. So we're trying to get to know them more than just, what is their health insurance and date of birth, right? So trying to get to know the child a little bit more ahead of time. And that helps us to know how the parent interacts with the child as well, how they respond in this questionnaire. And then triumphs and difficulties. So it seemed to me when I first became director that most of the time parents were used to hearing about the bad things about their kids, right? This is what went wrong. This is what my child did that was bad. And so I think I purposed in my heart to try to share the good things and to really focus on that. Obviously, you sometimes have to share the negative things, but I would try many times, even after every camp out, to connect with each parent and each family and just say something to them about how awesome their kid did, or something cool that their kid did, or something that they said, or how proud I was of their kid for something. And so really trying to communicate with the parents, not just the negative things about their child, but also the positive things about their child. And, you might not know if you have a large club, which our club is getting quite large. It's hard to always do that with everyone, but you might be able to split it up amongst your executive team or amongst, your adult staff to just share with the parents positive triumphs that their child has, not just the challenges and difficulties. And, I think it's just really parents love to know when their kids succeed and are a help in the club. I can't tell you how many parents are like, wow, thank you so much. I didn't know my child did those kinds of things, right? Because many children, as they're coming into Pathfinders, this is the time where they are blossoming out on their own and they're starting to learn who they are as people. And parents don't always get a chance to see that or be aware of it. And when we communicate with them, it can really help them. All right, so those are some of the things that I've found helpful to communicate with. Let's just take a tiny little bit of interaction time since I can't see you. This is so hard for me. I'm an extrovert. I normally am a face-to-face person, and instead I'm just looking at my little face in the screen. But anyway, this is life. So if you could put in the chat some aspect of communication that you think is important. So I'm thinking specifically of characteristics of communication. Like, what is something that you think is important in how you communicate? So not what you communicate. This chart is what we communicate, but what are some things that are important that you can think of as far as how your communication would happen best with parents or with anyone, parents, children, staff, etc. But we're specifically thinking about parents. So anyone want to add anything to the chat? Face-to-face, yes, definitely. Right? So if at all possible, face-to-face, but also the written is helpful, right? Because sometimes if you just give face-to-face, it doesn't always get through, right? They might forget, whereas if you have it written, I'm even thinking of specifically like, you know, but go ahead, other things that come to you as to how your communication should proceed. I may not be asking my question well, but maybe let me ask it this way. Get to know as many of the parents as possible. Definitely super important and helpful. I used to go when I was director and even visit people in their homes. Yeah, it can be hard to report triumphs, right? But that's where it's so important that we look for positive things. It can be a small positive thing, but I think it's really, really important that we try, especially for the kids' sake and the parents' sake, right? To look for positive things that the child did. Giving parents responsibility, we'll talk about that. There's pros and cons about having your parents as staff, but so let me ask my question a different way. What are some Christ-like characteristics of communication that we should be thinking about? Yeah, church services, potlucks, spending time. Yes, definitely. Some Pathfinders go out of their way to lend their hands at campouts, definitely. So some Christ-like methods of communication, Christ-like characteristics of communication. Like, I'll throw out one, kind, right? You want to be kind in how you communicate. Okay, listening. Yep, listening to what they're saying. What other? Humble. Yes, this is such an important one. Patient, right? Sometimes you might have to answer the same question 10 million times from the same parent. Being humble. You don't know everything about their child, right? Even though they may be a difficult parent, difficult child, but you definitely don't know everything. You don't necessarily know more than they do. Being respectful, yes. Being attentive, listening to their responses. Compassionate, yes. It's so important, right? Because sometimes they are hurt for some other reason, and so this is why they're speaking to you the way they are. I have been yelled at in my face, and it wasn't anything that I did, right? The parent was just having a really bad day, and they ended up yelling at me. So understanding where that parent is coming from. Praying with their families, yes, most definitely. Going visiting, especially if you've got a small club, this is easier. Empathetic, understanding their situations. One of the things that our club does is we decided, and I carried this on from the previous director before me. We've been really blessed in our club to have, over the last 50 years, we've only had 4 different directors. And so we've had a lot of continuity, which has been a blessing. But the director before me made this policy of, if a kid and a family cannot pay to go on something, we will find a way to help them go. And so we've never turned away. And so I got to know the parents that were going to have struggles, and I would go to them personally and be like, look, you just pay what you can and God will provide the means for the rest of it. And God always did. It was amazing what God did to be able to allow kids to come that wouldn't have been able to otherwise come. So understanding those situations that your parents are in, that you're addressing. Merciful, by all means, this is so important. Good thoughts. So these are some of the ones I put down as well. Kind and Christ-like, clear, right? So be clear in your communication. Try to not beat around the bush. Be really clear. Be succinct, right? Parents don't have all day either, right? So be clear and succinct in your emails, in your texts, in your phone calls, in your conversations, unless of course the parent is wanting to talk about something longer. But be frequent, keep communicating, even if it's about the same things. Continue to remind, and no one, I don't think, minds a reminder, especially if it's not like it's just a text that comes through on your phone or an email, right? Because sometimes emails get lost, texts get buried under things. So reminders are really important to do. And then again, the diverse methods, which I mentioned already, and many of you have mentioned other ways of communicating with them as well. And then be confident. And I don't mean this in an arrogant way, right? But the church has elected you to be the director. So go forward and be the director. Be the best servant leader you can be. And go forward with confidence in that, and with the Lord's leading you, even in challenging circumstances. All right, so good. Thank you for your responses. So we're going to move on to another thing that I think is important. So after communication is sharing your philosophy of what a Pathfinder club should be and what a Pathfinder should be, right? I think this is really important because, again, some parents don't always understand this. So I usually try to communicate this with either an email or have a parent meeting or some way with talking with new parents, new families that are joining in. And I really believe Pathfinders need a safe place to grow in Christ and community. And sometimes that means without their parents involved, right? So maybe their parents might be part of the lack of safety in their lives. Unfortunately, this is true in some families. And so, when you have families that are not strong, safe Christian families, which unfortunately are more and more, Pathfinders really does become a safe place. And I cannot tell you the number of kids through the years who have told me, please do not let my parents be a staff member. Please don't let my parent come on a camp out, and sometimes that kid has been just trying to be manipulative. And most of the time there's legitimate concerns there. And I already know that, and I already don't want that parent along, right? So, but how to address those things is very challenging. And of course, that's part of why we're here to talk about some of those things. So I tried to operate under prevention rather than reaction. So rather than suddenly being put in a place where maybe I've let one parent do something and not another, I tried to be very consistent with how I was addressing things and talking. So being aware of what specific parents were like, getting to know those parents and recognizing, they might offer to help in the club, and I will, if, I've already gotten to know them a little bit and I realize they are not going to be good with kids. They are not going to be kind to kids, whatever the reason may be. And I will just say, I really appreciate it, but we're doing great right now, right? We're fine, but thank you for your offer, right? So I don't need to tell them that they're not good with kids. If they ask, then I might pray about it very much and see if the Lord might lead me to say something. But usually I didn't do that, and they would find another niche to work in and help in. Or I would, if I really did need help with something, I might put them to organize the Pathfinder closet, or, get the food for the camp out or something like this, right? Where they're not necessarily interacting with the kids, but they are still able to help. And so I'm trying to prevent the negative things that can sometimes result rather than react to them. So And I think this can also, Pathfinders can be a model to parents of how we can address um, children who are struggling in a positive, constructive way rather than a destructive way. One of the stories that is still just the nearest and dearest to my heart. We had two Pathfinders who were teen guys. This was many years ago, when I was director, and um, they came back from the summer this one year and were just defiant. And I learned later that they were being defiant at school as well, but they would just do very bullying, doing other just defiant things in the Pathfinder room. And so I took them aside privately, had a conversation with them. They were unwilling to make the changes that I asked and that I talked with them about. And so I went and spoke with their parents, and I did it together with the kids then as well. So I talked with the parents, and then I talked with both of them, and we gave them another chance, and they broke that chance as well. And so we had to ask them to, with their parents' understanding and blessing, we spent hours talking with them and addressing this situation and seeking to bring redemption to the children, and eventually had to give them a time away from Pathfinders. And it was during that time, interestingly enough, that actually both of the kids ended up turning around. One of them ended up saying, wow, I actually, he recognized that there were boundaries that had been set and that he needed to respect those. And he had not had ever boundaries given him in his life. And he said, I want to come back to Pathfinders, and I want to be baptized. And he completely turned his life around and became one of my best TLTs. And it's just such a powerful story of how, when we work together to seek to prevent situations, not just reacting to those situations, really getting to know families, getting to know and understand how the parents are interacting with their kids. And these parents struggled. They struggled a lot to, I think, parent well, and they went on the side. I mean, you can have parents that are like way too disciplinarian, and then you have the parents that are not doing anything to discipline their children. And these parents were more on that end. And so realizing, what a family is like, and then seeking to prevent some of these things that happen. And, not every story is like that, obviously. I wish it was, but I do think as we continue to seek to make Pathfinders a safe place for kids, sometimes that is going to mean their parents are not going to be involved, or it might mean their parents are going to be involved. And each situation is different, and we need to be able to react to those, or not react to those, but prevent those as much as we possibly can. Another thing that's important, I think, in my philosophy of pathfinding, at least, that I try to share, is confidentiality. So I share this with the parents and with the kids. Whatever they tell me, unless I am required to report it, will remain confidential. So I explain to them the things that I'm required to report, but I seek to be a safe place, to have Pathfinders be a safe place. Obviously, if I'm dealing with some other sort of complicated situation, then I may need to break that, but I will talk with the child about that as well. So I think it's important for parents to know that in order for Pathfinders to be a safe place, there needs to be some conversations that children may have that are going to be confidential. In addition, I think this is important to empower our Pathfinders, right? So I talk with parents a lot about this, that I'm going to be giving their children a lot of responsibilities, and that it is okay that they make mistakes, right? So growing leaders almost requires mistake making. No one is going to do something perfectly the first time. And so I think it's really important for parents to understand that we are not out to dictate their kids or be a tyrant over their kids. We're out there to empower them. We want to grow leaders. And so this requires giving a lot of responsibility, and they're going to make mistakes. And so this is why I think it's so important to affirm Pathfinders as much as possible, because many times they are not getting that at home, unfortunately. So I think, as I mentioned, there's often two extremes of parents, and you will have some of both in your club, invariably, right? The parents who are who are very authoritarian and never let their kids make any mistake without massive punishment, or on the other side who just don't really do anything and their kids have no boundaries and no consequences. And so trying to bridge that gap is very challenging. And this is one thing that I love about Pathfinders, because it provides a place with structure, but it also provides a place for them to grow and to make mistakes and to not be crushed for those mistakes, but to instead be empowered to be leaders and to be mentored into leadership. And one of the things that I think is the most important, that I talk with my staff about extensively, is protecting kids as my first responsibility. So the kids matter more than the parents. I love the parents, obviously, but I have been elected by the church to protect the kids, to make this a safe place for kids. And so that may mean I need to report parents. I have reported several parents over the years for abuse. I wish this was not the case, but I've had to do it. And unfortunately, many other people have not been willing to do that in my staff. It's very hard to do. It's just about crushes me and tears me apart. But I think this is really important, that we go forward into this recognizing that there is probably going to be, at some point while we're director, we're going to encounter a situation of abuse by a parent. And how are we going to address this? Are we willing to stick our neck out? Obviously, I didn't tell them it was me, but I think at least in 2 of the situations, they definitely figured it out, or surmised that it was me. And it was rough situations for me, really, really rough times. But I think this is so important. It's not about being liked by the parents. Yes, obviously, that is a wonderful thing. I'm a people pleaser. I think we should try to have the parents like us, but this is not our first responsibility. It is protecting kids. It's caring for kids. All right. So communicating, sharing your philosophy, living your philosophy, and then being your honest self. This is so important as well. Be yourself. Don't try to be the person that you think a director should be. Obviously, there's room for growth for all of us, but we're all going to be different. I am a very different director than the director before me. The current director in my club is very different than I am. And yet we all have similarities in that we love kids. We want to empower them and we want to make leaders out of them. So in our club, our TLTs do the teaching of the honors. They do the teaching of the IA classes. They do the counseling. They do the planning. They do pretty much everything. So we are facilitating them. We are empowering them to be leaders, and they are leaders in our club. So, but how each one of us has done this has been very different. And I think it's important to recognize that and be who you are. Don't try to be someone you're not, because the kids and the parents will know that. So embrace your humanity, embrace your personality. You might not be able to tell it right now because I'm here not even seeing you, you're in your faces, but I'm a very quirky, kind of goofy person. And I have had to realize, like, this is just who I am, and I need to embrace this. I am not anyway, I have a lot of strange things about me that are pretty goofy and weird. I'll find a dry spot under the tent when we had just a weekend of rain, and I'll do a rain dance or some weird thing, right? So but be yourself. Like, my current director is not that way, but he's also really wonderful and loving and funny, and the kids really like him. So be who you are. Don't try to be someone else, right? So I think this is really important. People can tell when you are genuine and sincere. And even if, I've definitely had families over the years who are like, this club is too crazy, we're going to go elsewhere. And that's fine. It is okay. You do not have to have everyone like you. And I've had many parents who say, Rahel's kind of strange, but it's okay. We still love her and we want our kids there. So, just being who you are is, I think, more important than trying to be someone you're not. Live with integrity. Be genuine, be sincere, be who you really are. I think for me, this has been a challenge in addressing parent issues, because I do not want to speak ill of anyone without reason, right? And so I've really tried to keep from telling most of my Pathfinder staff about when I'm dealing with a challenging issue. So I had a few individuals that I spoke with, more my deputy directors and then one other individual. But I would really try to not bring up parent issues in front of the whole staff, and definitely not in front of the kids if at all possible. And vice versa, right? So I don't want to talk negatively about a staff member or a child in front of a parent. And so I think just being a person of integrity, don't say something to one person that you wouldn't say to another person, unless you're dealing with a situation where you're forced into that by one of these challenging circumstances. But it's very easy to fall into gossip, right? You know a lot about families as a Pathfinder director. You know a lot about challenges that they face. And so seeking instead to be a person of positivity and integrity, rather than reflecting on those negative things that you may know about the parents. And then admit your mistakes. This is so important as well. You are not going to be perfect. You are not going to do a perfect job as director. That is just reality. None of us are ever perfect. This was probably 2 or 3 years into being director for me, and I had a trip that was planned, a Pathfinder trip, and 2 of my staff were scheduled to go, and I really trusted these staff. Like I thought things would be fine. I couldn't go. This was, and neither of my deputy directors could go either. And it was, what happened on that trip had repercussions for 2 or 3 years afterwards, and it did not go well. And it went very badly, actually. And I ended up having to ask a staff member to step down. I had to have multiple parent meetings. I had to make some very different policies and things as a result of that one trip that I did not go on. And so I had to admit I was wrong. I should have gone myself, or at least had one of my deputies be able to go. And so I think, being able to acknowledge, say, I messed up. This is so important, right? Because if you are trying to defend yourself, you're going to end up in some really bad situations where it really might have been your fault and you weren't willing to take ownership of that. And this applies when you're addressing situations with parents as well. And I think part of the problem with that trip was that one of that staff member that went was a parent. And so this is, we'll talk about that more in a minute here, but I think it's really important, again, to be open about your mistakes and then to make things right. Be the first one to apologize. Don't be the last one, right? Be willing to own it and say, hey, I'm sorry, I messed up. Will you forgive me? And this applies to parents. This applies to kids. And I think with kids, it's equally important, right? We're not talking about kids here, but I think even as much as kids then talk to their parents, it's our responsibility to own our mistakes and admit them, and this will help build trust in parents as well. This next one is my favorite, affirmation. I do not think we can do enough of this. The more good things you say about a child to the parents, the more the parents will trust that you care about that child. And the more they may learn about how really awesome their child is, even if their child is not always awesome, right? Because one of you mentioned that, right? What if their child really didn't do very many great things? Well, they probably smiled at someone, and they probably did something that you can mention to the parent, right? Because many times if the child is difficult in Pathfinders, they're probably difficult at home as well. And having that positive affirmation can mean so much to the kid and to the parent. Observe ways in which parents can be affirmed. I try to do this as well. So positivity, compliments, thanking them for being on time, thanking them for bringing something extra for the kid, whatever, right? So thanking them for being a good parent, thanking them for raising a great kid, right? So affirming the parents, and as many of you mentioned, getting to know them outside of Pathfinders as well really helps you to be able to do that. Again, the more affirmation can help your mindset as well. So I would especially try to do this towards families that I found to be challenging to interact with. So the more I can affirm real things, not make up things, but the more I can look for positive things to affirm, the more my mindset is able to change and I'm able to actually interact with them more healthfully myself. Enjoy the process, even when it's difficult. So sometimes, of course, it is difficult to affirm, but that growth of that relationship is worth it, even when there are bumps along the way. So I'm choosing to say, hey, I'm going to keep looking for ways to affirm, even though maybe after this camp out, it's really challenging for this family, right? But don't give up. You can't force community, but you can build it as you seek to lift other people up. And I love this about Jesus. He's always doing this, right? He rarely comes to someone and says, you terrible person, right? He asks them questions. He gives them positive things. He heals them. He points them to Jesus, right? He doesn't come with a negative attitude. He comes with a positive one. He comes with an optimistic one. He sees their potential. And I think this is what affirmation helps us to do, to see potential. And then many of you mentioned this earlier as well, but look for things that you can do as a whole group, right? Not just your club. I think it is super important to have times, most of the time, where kids are just there for Pathfinders, not with their parents. But it is important to have times where people can all work together, parents and kids. So we have a community Christmas program that we do every year, where all hands are on deck, parents, staff, kids, doing this huge community Christmas program. It's really, really fun. So other service projects, we also do fun things. We have a corn maze, we have a pool party night where parents and kids can come as well. So times that can still build connections between parents and Pathfinders, but are not all of the time. So this is the big question. I think if I had to pick what is the most challenging issue with parents, it's this question. Should you have parents as staff? I remember when I was a young director, early on, going to a Pathfinder training event where the person who is a well-known Pathfinder person in the North American division said, you should never have parents as staff. And I remember thinking, then I'm going to lose my whole club, right? I mean, at that time we had a really small club. If I didn't have parents as staff, I'd be toast. I wouldn't have a club. So it's maybe in a big church, a big club, you have that luxury, right? But many times in a small club, you do not have that luxury. You don't have any other people who can, right? So this makes it very complicated and difficult and unavoidable in a small church, in a small club, because it's sometimes even hard to find someone who's willing to be director, let alone help with staff, right? So many of you may be facing situations like this. And, I really do believe that this person who said this, that parents shouldn't be staff, was onto something, in the sense that Pathfinders really are at the age where they need some time. It's not a lot of time, a couple hours a week at most, right? To blossom, to grow apart from their parents. This is the time when they need those times to have other mentors in their lives, other figures in their lives. But it's not, again, always possible, right? So I can understand this ideal, but the reality is it's just very hard to find a situation where you're going to be able to have that ideal. So how then can you address this situation when you do need to have parents as staff? I think again, going back to the very beginning, is clear communication about expectations, right? So some parents are going to help way too much. Some parent, not let their kid do anything on their own. Other parents are going to criticize way too much, and their kid won't be able to do anything right. And then you're going to have, the gamut in between and everything else, right? So you might have a parent who says, oh no, my kid can't handle a camp out on their own. I have to come with them. I've had those, right? And then you have the kid telling me, please don't let my parent come, but the parent like comes anyway, or vice versa, right? The kid really needs the parent and the parent's like, nope, can't come, right? So you just have this range of challenges. So if the clearer you can be about your expectations, the better, right? Say you have a parent who needs to come on a camp out. We've had this because of health concerns and other reasons. So I'm just really upfront with them. I'm like, you're not a Pathfinder staff. Like, you are here to care for your kid when they have the health challenge that they need. But, please otherwise do not discipline, do not, I'm being very simplistic here, but I just say, it's really important that your kid be a part of Pathfinders and that other kids don't feel that this kid is being favored or being, that it's unfair that their parents come or don't come or whatever it is, like, hey, I want my parents to come too, right? So just being very clear about your expectations up front, whatever you decide those to be. And I think that's really important that you decide as a staff together, like what our expectations should be if parents come along on a camp out or if parents are staff. So, one of the things that we do is we provide separation wherever possible. So I would never have that parent who is staff ever, working with their kid, right? So again, we have TLTs doing most of our teaching and counseling, but we do have adult supervisors and adult, facilitators and mentors. And so I always put a different adult staff with and not with their kid, right? So whatever class they're in, whatever counseling, etc. So you provide separation and this can help, right? So the parent is then involved with another group of kids than the kid that is theirs, and they're able to better separate themselves, right? So it helps to just provide that natural separation. But I think you've got to expect unintentional favoritism anyway, right? It's probably going to happen. Or criticism, right? Too much criticism. So just no matter how clear you are on your expectations, and no matter how much you try to set up that separation, it's probably still going to happen on some level. So just if you have parents as staff, just know that you're probably going to have to deal with that, right? You're probably going to have to address it. And I think this can be part of your expectations as well. Say, hey, if I see anything, just that, I will be saying something to just remind you, right? Like not in a vindictive way, but just like, hey, like make sure you're not showing favoritism over there. Like make sure all the kids have a chance to do whatever the positive thing is, etc. I think there's ways to do it without calling the parent out in public. But just being some gentle reminders to them about favoritism. One of the other things that we've done to help this is to so in several of our campouts, we have different units doing their own food. So they buy their food, they prepare it, they do everything. And so we used to have the adult staff who was the mentor of the TLT counselor eating with that unit, but we found that this also provided sometimes favoritism, etc. So now we have a staff unit. So the staff unit does our own cooking, our own cleaning, our own eating, and this leaves the parents away again. So you provide this, again, one level of separation that helps to prevent as much as possible that unintended favoritism, because I really believe most parents are not intentionally favoring their kids. They're kids, right? So it's a natural thing. So if you expect it and recognize that it's going to happen, it'll be easier to address it. And then be willing to take criticism. I mean, you're going to have, depending on your policies about this, you'll have some parents who will be very upset that they can't be with their kid. Other parents who will be, not maybe favoring other kids over their kid, right? So I've had that experience as well, where I expect favoritism, but instead the parent so much doesn't want to favor their kid that they just ignore them, right? So you can have this is why, to me, this is still like the biggest challenge of addressing parents in Pathfinders is having parents as staff. And I can understand after 13 years of being a director why at the very beginning I heard that statement and I thought it was crazy. What would I do without parents as staff? And I realized I understand why this person said it. But it's just something you got to deal with. And 9 times out of 10, the parents that have been staff in my club have done a phenomenal job. So I want to be clear about that. I'm not had really good parents as staff. So it's not been, but then there have been the challenging ones. And like I said, I also try to look ahead, right? So if I know a family maybe has kids that are coming up into Pathfinders and I'm like, oh boy, I think they're going to want to be staff, I try to, head that off. If it's someone that I want to be staff, I'll go and talk with them about it and approach them and ask them and say, hey, have you ever thought about being Pathfinder staff? And we could really use you in this situation or this capacity. But if it's someone that I don't want to be staff, I know that they're maybe, unkind to children or, do not do well with kids, I will also try to preempt things and talk to them about, how important it is that their kid is coming into Pathfinders and it's a place for him to be, learning, trying his wings and being himself and, without parents. And it's just exciting. I can't wait for your kid to come, right? So I'm trying to build a bridge with those who I want to be staff and make clear to those who I don't that this is probably not where they should think about serving. We do have, I have had some, like I mentioned, do some other things besides working directly with kids. So I have had parents in the past who have really, really, really wanted to help. And I know that they don't work well with kids, but I'll put them doing some behind the scenes thing where they can still help. So it's not that I will turn them away necessarily, although there's have been some that I have because of ways that I've seen them treat other kids. And I know that kids are my first responsibility. And even if I really need help, I'd rather not have help than have their help, because I know that it will be a negative detriment to the kids. So I did have one parent who as I mentioned, I had to let go as staff. And this was very, very challenging for me. And I was young, much younger than them. But they had been abusive to a kid in front of other people. And so I had to ask them to step down. And it was very, very, very challenging. And so this is why I say I think this is the most difficult one, because it's going to happen for you. Probably most likely you're going to have a parent as staff. And so how to address the situations that arise is not easy, but I believe God will help you as you're wrestling with them. So that was a pretty heavy one. This is a more lighter one. Learn to laugh. I mean, parents are hilarious. Parents and kids are hilarious, right? So I think if we think about loving people, loving to be with people, loving to work with people, all people, even the difficult ones, you can laugh about something in your interaction with them. So you're going to find, I think, if we focus on the loving and the laughing, more opportunity to do that than times of frustration, even though those will come. And, I've had a lot of just fun conversations with parents, hilarious things that they're concerned about with their kid that really is not an issue with that kid, but they think it is. I mean, just, you all, I'm sure, have had these experiences too, right? So it's you can either be frustrated or you can just laugh at it. So I actually find that some of my most amusing things that happen are with the parents and how they respond to things. And so I have in the past kind of made a mental notebook of these crazy things that have happened. And I'll talk about them with other directors, and not in a mocking way, but just in a hey, this is hilarious, right? So because if you can find a way to laugh, not in a ridiculing way, but just being amused at life, it can help you deal with some of those challenges and frustrations that parents bring to you. Sometimes though, it's important to talk with God about these in order to laugh, right? To talk with God about the most confusing and painful experiences. And of course, other people too. I don't mean to leave other people out there, but God is the one who actually can help change our hearts, right? And he can change our difficult, challenging views of people into views of laughter. So God is the ultimate one who can help us to see his perspective on situations. So I want you to think for a minute here. And maybe, let's see, what time is it here? All right, I think we have time to do this. So let's think about using the principles above that we've talked about. How would you deal with these situations? So let's kind of just take a couple minutes for each situation. So if a parent came to you complaining about some discipline you had enacted on their child at Pathfinders, what would you do? How would you handle it? Put it in the chat if you have an idea of what you might do. The parent complains to you about some disciplinary action. Maybe you can imagine maybe this is a parent that doesn't discipline their child at all. Maybe that'll help you think about what you would do. So what would you say, or what would you do? What would be some of the principles that would be important to think about in that situation? Anyone have any thoughts? This is a challenging one. These are all challenging, but what are some things that you would do? I'm not seeing any responses. Anyone have any thoughts? What would you say to the parent? Or how would you handle that situation? Pray? Yes, most definitely. Explain why the discipline was necessary, why we protect the child. That's a really good answer. Good job. Discuss with the parent why we have certain disciplinary procedure for the safety of the club and ask them how they would handle it. Yeah, I think reviewing your expectations, right? If you've set out clear expectations as to what has happened, there you go. Good. Yes, be clear explanation of the club rules and expectations. Yes, because I think this is so important. I don't believe we should be doing discipline that doesn't have some sort of expectation given in advance of it, right? If the person doesn't know what they're supposed to do, you shouldn't be disciplining them. So it should be based on the expectations. Meet with the parents and pray. Yes, definitely. I think this is so important, right? Pray with them. Say, hey, I want to share with you our expectations, but let's pray in advance. Be empathetic. Yes, but be firm and fair. So, many times if a parent is complaining about the discipline, maybe, again, if the parent hasn't disciplined them before or very much at all, they might not even know what their child is doing there at Pathfinders, because there might be some things that the child does that the parents never realize that they've done. So, yes, to be very clear and to be firm and fair. I like this here. The child is misbehaving, needs to be disciplined. So, but discuss with the child and then the parent, and then pray together with them both. That's a really good answer as well, right? So then you're working together as a team. And I think this is important too, to be able to talk with the child and with the parent, and then with both of them. I would, though, at least initially talk with just the parent, right? Because the child, if the parent hasn't disciplined them, the child might be manipulative, right? I mean, they might be trying to say, oh, I didn't do this, or that didn't happen this way, right? So being able to talk with the parent first, I think in this situation would be really important. And that's where, again, your expectations come in at the beginning. Excellent responses. Good job. All right, this next one. 2 parents complaining about bullying the same kids. So you have this altercation between kids, and both parents are saying, my kid was bullied. When obviously it was one bullying the other, but how would you handle this situation? These are really challenging, but I've had all of these. So you probably maybe had some of these as well. But if both parents are saying, hey, my kid was bullied, right? But you've experienced these kids, very clearly which one was the bullier and which one was not. how would you handle this situation where you've got multiple parents involved? So go ahead and put any thoughts you have in the chat as well. I know normally I would have people break into groups and discuss this, but we are how we are right now. All right, discuss situation with both parents and children together. That can work at some point, right? I think if you did that initially, it might not work out so well, right? Because you might end up with some sort of fight or people disliking each other. I would definitely want to do that eventually or potentially, depending on how the situation goes, but I'm not sure that's where I would start. Okay, discuss the children first. Understand the situation. I think this is really important to discuss with children and the other people who observed it. If you observed the bullying, then it's pretty obvious, but if you didn't, maybe you need to talk with the people who did observe it. Good. I think this is a good response. Pray, assure the parents that you and the staff are properly supervising the children and multiple staff observe the behavior. Yes, I think this is really important to both parents, right? You're communicating to them that we did observe this, multiple people observed this. It's not just my word versus their word, right? This is indeed what happened. Listening to them. Yes, this is really crucial because sometimes even though a kid may be a bully, they may have been bullied before, and this is what leads them to bully, right? So really understanding the depth of the situation and listening to the children. Yeah, discuss situations with kids separately, then together, then with parents. I like that order. Again, I don't know that there's one right way here, guys. I'm just, the Spirit's going to lead you. Every situation's different. These are just some thought-provoking questions. So yes, but I like that as well. So again, talking to the kids, helping them understand, like, this is what I saw. You were being a bully, or this is what I saw. You were being bullied, right? And explain to them the consequences of this. And then, let's see. Yes, and this person agrees as well, Patricia. Spoken with the children prior to the discussion with the parents. Yes, I totally agree. I feel like so often I've seen this observed that people go directly to parents, right? Whereas the kids they know exactly what's going on, right? They know what they're doing. They know what they've experienced. And I think it's really helpful as we're seeking to train leaders and facilitate growth into adulthood, that we talk with the kids first. And doesn't mean that we leave out the parents, but we really, express to them, this is what happened. Like, this is what we saw happening, and this is not okay, right? Not okay to be the bully, and, it is not okay that you have been bullied, right? So to address the consequences with the kids first and address the situation, and then communicate with the parents as well, based on that conversation with the kids and what you end up deciding to do. Good. Very good. Good responses. All right. Last one, and then we'll wrap up here. I have a couple more things to say, but we're both nearing the end. So parent staff making decisions that go above yours regarding their kids. Definitely experienced this as well. Okay, good. So take parent aside and discuss line of authority confidentially, explain their role, and preferably not to have parent as a teacher to their child class. Yes, good. So again, hopefully you already don't have that parent teaching the class. But yes, I think it's so important to still, just like you would do with a kid, you wouldn't want to call them out in front of everyone. You don't want to call the parent out either, right? You need this parent as your staff, or you wouldn't have them as staff. So unless they've been abusive, to call them aside and say, hey, like, this is really not cool, right? I had this experience where there were two kids who were injured, and the parent only took their kid and worked with their kid, but the other kid was injured more than their kid. Anyway, so yeah, just recognizing confidentially aside, taking them aside and saying, hey, remember these expectations that we had. All right, Jennifer has said here, pray for wisdom, then take parents aside and address. Separate parent from teaching. Yeah, separate the parent from teaching the kids. And the reality is, though, this can happen even if you do that, right? But yes, I agree with you. This is where we should start, at least. Try to have that separation as much as possible. Have the expectations with the parents who are staff. But then and then try to confidentially aside dealing with them afterwards is so important, because you don't want the kid to feel bad. It's not the kid's fault, right? And I think this is where it's easy to go, well, like, this kid's being favored, but it's really not the kid's issue. It's the parent's issue. So it's where you need to address with the parent. Good. Any other thoughts on this one that anyone would add? So I had this situation. The parent was the director. I had given the child an assignment, and the child told me their parent told them they didn't have to do what I said. I did nothing in order to avoid problems. The parent was the director in favors. Oh boy, that's really tough, right? When the parent is the director. This is, I think, one of the toughest situations, because you really don't have a lot of recourse here. Thankfully, I mean, this class is intended for people who are being directors, but yeah, if you are a director and a parent, you have extra levels of responsibility to not show favoritism. I think it's super hard. I'm not a parent, so I would like to be, but I can't have kids, unfortunately. So my Pathfinders are my kids, but yeah, like, man, as a parent who is a director, you have extra levels of responsibility to not show favoritism. It's hard. I cannot imagine how hard it must be. So, yeah, but I'm sorry you've been through that. It should not happen that way, right? Because if you were the class teacher, the parent should ask their kid to do what you've asked them to do. So that was an inappropriate overstep of bounds. So I'm really sorry that you've experienced that, Patricia. Yeah, review your set expectations with parent staff established previously. When I was director, I did this every year. I talked to all the parents who were staff, and I just reminded them, I'm like, I love you guys. I'm so glad you're here. I couldn't do this without you, but like, please be careful to seek to show equal care for all the kids, right? And that's why I'm putting you here versus with your child, etc. So trying to just be open and clear and communicate with them. It's not that I have anything against them. I want them there, but just to be clear about the expectations of parents as staff. Good. Thank you for your responses. I know it's not so fun as being in person, but we can at least communicate a little bit. These are challenging situations, and I don't think there's any easy or right answer. The situations were intended to just make us think, right? Let's see, Patricia, when I was director, I did have to tell the parent staff to be Pathfinder teachers and not parents during time of Pathfinders. Yeah. I mean, we need to keep reminding, right? Because as parents, it's so easy to slip into parent mode. I can imagine, right? So, it's just like, yeah. So be a reminder, but be a positive reminder. And again, I think the more we can provide that separation for them, the easier it will be for them to do that. So we can assist them in this as well. Good. All right. So kind of along those lines, I'm not a believer in situational ethics in the sense of like situational ethics says it doesn't matter what you do, it just matters the end result. So do whatever you need to do in that situation to get the end result you want. I don't think that's biblical at all. But I think when you're dealing with parents, you need some situational responses, right? You're not going to be able to use the same response in every situation and with every parent. So, every situation is new, and you've got to then address that new situation with more prayer and more help from God, and addressing that situation as its own, trying to understand everything that's going on there. And therefore, again, listen, right? Try to understand what's really happening before you respond. Watch the body language, watch the tone. It's better to remain silent for a while or to say gently that you need more time to think than it is to say something that you regret for years, right? So trying to listen carefully before responding to this situation you're in with that parent. And then speak into crises. So don't run away from crises, go towards them. Of course, try to prevent them if you can, first of all, but be that first person to apologize. rather than reacting or escalating based on the parent's response. Be consistent with your responses, but also be willing to explore new things. Many good ideas come out of suggestions that you may think are like, that's crazy, but you take it and you're like, maybe we could do that, right? Actually, a lot of things in our club changed for the better over the years while I was director, because I listened to not crazy people's, but people's initially seemingly crazy suggestions that they brought up. And many of those times it was parents who would bring up a suggestion. And at first I was just like, that's not going to work. But I would tell them I'd pray about it. And I would come to realize that it could work with some tweaking, with some modification, right? So be willing to be open to those new horizons that may come, especially from parents. Seize opportunities. Take, again, to affirm, to get to know parents, to get to know kids, to bridge gaps between people, to encourage community, to encourage support. So be that person who is looking for the ways to build up rather than tear down. And then, of course, as we've mentioned here all along the way, like, try to just pray all the time. It was a constant thing in my mind as I was working with parents and pathfinders, like, always spent like, Lord, help me. How do I answer this? How do I deal with this situation? And God would always come through and help me. Many times I'd end up saying something that I wasn't expecting, but it would be the right thing that needed to be said. And so when we're listening to the Holy Spirit, he can then speak the words that parent needs to hear. But also never hesitate to speak the truth in love. Again, many times you may need to say something that is hard to say to a parent about themselves or about their child. But if the Lord is leading you to do that, speak it, and speak it in love and with courage, and knowing that God is with you. And so I'd like to end with this passage, which is so beautiful, and I think really applies to, as we're dealing with all people, but especially as we're thinking about parents who may challenge us. Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor. For we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. So don't be two-faced, right? Speak truth. We're all members of one another. It's okay to be angry sometimes. Sometimes we need to be angry, but make it right. Seek to make things right. And then Paul continues, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification. That's affirmation. We're seeking to build people up, parents included. So seeking to not speak corruptly, but what is good for them, that it may impart grace to the hearers, grace, mercy, love. Do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. So letting our hearts be full of God's grace and kindness, not anger or bitterness. And finally, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. And, this is really the golden rule. Treat parents the way you would want to be treated. Communicate clearly, speak the truth in love, and live with consistent integrity. So I think that's the main thing I wanted to share, with you. We can have a prayer, or if there are any questions, we can maybe take a few minutes for questions, and then I'm going to stop sharing here. If you have any questions for me, I can take a couple minutes for questions. If not, then I can just pray, and then I'm glad to stay around for a few minutes if you do have some more personalized questions. You're welcome to put, I see we have a question here. Okay, that's a question for Cheryl.
All right. But could I speak for a few moments, Professor Rahel?
Oh yeah, sure. I just let me see if there's any other.
Okay.
Just give them a minute to see if there's any other questions, and then go for it. Or you want me to have prayer first and then you speak? Or what do you
No, I think we can, because the reason I wanted to say is because this is one of the biggest things in Pathfinder ministry, I think, that has given me my most stress, which is engaging with. So I completely agree with you in the beginning, because I remember I used to say I deal with children as well. And this professional speaker pulled me aside and said, I would change the way you term that. So now I've taught myself to say I engage with children, I engage with youth. So I would say the same thing with parents. I engage, because yes, it's saying you don't want to, but you have to, and which is kind of true. But the thing is, I think another thing that I've been saying, I said this, I think, about in Nestor's class, which is use other directors and vent a little bit. For me, that's what I do. I actually use this class as a chance to vent. I tell, like you told a few, you don't name names, but you say a few times where you were like, whoa, this parent was like, wow. You know, for me, I'll tell the story of one time I had to stay at the church till Pathfinders ended at 1. I was there till 5. They decided to do some errands and said, no, you can leave the kids by themselves. They're big. No, I'm going. They're under my responsibility. So if something happens to them because I left them, that's on me, not on you. So I will stay until you pick them up. And of course, you know, he felt sad about that, but you know, it would have been nicer if he picked them up and then did his errands, then do his errands, then make me stay there for that many hours. So yeah, vent, talk to the other directors.
Yeah, I mentioned that in terms of the sharing things earlier, but I think thank you for reiterating it, because I think it's really important to be able to talk about this. So, you know, and also to talk with your executive team as well. You know, I think it's important to have people within your club, at least 1 or 2 that you can talk with, that you trust them to be utterly confidential, that you need to be addressing these things with, because, you know, you can't be a one person trying to figure out all of these things. You know, it's really, really hard. There's a question here. How do you deal with overbearing parents in the club? Oh boy. I mean, I've had a lot of those as well, of course, as I'm sure some of you have. You know, for me, it's been very important to, again, have clear expectations and clear boundaries, right? So this is what I'm expecting from the kids. This is what I'm expecting from the parents of the kids. So if anyone steps across those boundaries, here are the consequences, right? So for instance, I once had to ask a parent who had come along on a camp out to leave. Like, you know, you've crossed those boundaries. We can't have you here right now. You know, it's so like, I think, and then ever after that, I said, you can't come on campouts anymore. I'm sorry. You know, you're welcome to go and stay at the hotel in town and come pop in for a little bit. That's fine if, you know, but so I think where we often get into trouble is we don't have clear expectations and we don't have clear boundaries and we don't have clear consequences. So if we have those, if we're clear about those, overbearing people will get that, right? I think many people are overbearing because they don't have those boundaries that they're, you know, or they're going to test your boundaries, right? But yes, pray also, a lot of prayer. All of this is assuming a ton of prayer because yeah, like I mentioned several times too, I also think this has been the most challenging issue for me as being a director, is dealing with parents. Like, it's just really tough. Many of them not. Many of them are incredible, as you put here, as someone put here, like, you know, they have parents as staff who teach their kids in their club. If that works for you, hallelujah. That has never worked for me. But, you know, each club is different and each circumstance is different. So I think you have to be flexible too, right? So if you have a really good situation, like our current director is a parent with a kid, and he is like above reproach. I have never once seen any favoritism. I mean, it's almost as if his kids are like not his kids, right? It's incredible how he does it. So I mean, it is possible, right? So like, I don't want to make it sound like you should not ever have your parents teach their kids or anything. I mean, especially if you've got a really small club, like that may be your only option, right? So like, just be flexible, but also just be really clear then with your expectations, right? What are you expecting of them? What are your boundaries? What are the consequences if they cross those boundaries? Not in a vindictive way, but right, I mean, we do have ideals and we have standards, and we want Pathfinders to be a safe place for kids. To me, that is the bottom line. We want kids to feel safe, and we want them to find Jesus. So sometimes parents are going to be an asset to that. Sometimes they're not going to be, right? So we need to be able to ascertain which that's going to be for each parent and child.
And one thing I wanted to do, to another vent of mine is, but also some advice as well, is be aware of, get to know your parents as well. In the fact that, like for me, in my home club, Pathfinders was not something that was, 20, 30. It was, something that only went back 10 years. So I actually had, my club growing up was actually no parents as staff. None of them were former Pathfinders. They didn't understand the ministry. It was my former Pathfinders who had become young adults who are now the staff. So you have to really spell it out to those parents and really, like you said, define expectations versus maybe somebody who is a former Pathfinder who is more understanding of the ministry. But then you might come into other things like they might be saying,
they have their own ideas.
Yeah, how come it's not done? Yeah, how come it's not done like we did it in 1975? And then you say, we do things different. Yeah, we do things different now. So, we understand. So it's those kind of things you have to be aware of.
And I think, as I mentioned that a little bit too, but I thank you for reminding everyone of that too. It's like having that consistently shared, because I think if you keep sharing your philosophy on a regular basis, then it reminds everyone, because it's not just these newer people maybe that don't know Pathfinders, right? But it's good to keep everyone on the same page and remind them, like, what is our point of being here? What is Pathfinders all about? What is our philosophy here as a club? What are we seeking to do? And I think we all need reminders. It's easy to get in the nitty gritty. I've got to fill out all these points and all this paperwork and forget the bigger picture that we have. So, yeah, really important. There's some questions here I think that would be for you, Cheryl. I didn't understand the first Camping Wild 101 and then the worksheet.
Yes, I'm responding to that. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, well, shall we have a prayer? All right, let's pray together. Dear Jesus, I thank you so much for your incredible love for us. I thank you for being ultimately our awesome parent. And Lord, as we engage and interact with the parents of the kids in our clubs, give us wisdom. Help us to treat them the way we would want to be treated. Help us to communicate clearly. Help us to speak the truth in love. Help us to make clear our expectations, and then to live with consistent integrity in our own lives. Lord, as we each face the challenging parents in our clubs, give us wisdom, give us grace, give us tact, give us help in setting the right boundaries and making clear a place to make Pathfinders a safe place for kids where they can learn to love Jesus even more. Thank you so much, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Once again, everyone. So thank you guys for joining us tonight. We will see you Wednesday at 7:30 again, as we will be doing our last AYMT course. And I'm just trying to make sure I pull it up. Our last AYMT course, which will be, it's coming up. Yes, EDUC 200. EDUC 200. So that will be intent and organization. Actually, I don't get the, let me get it up for you guys. Alyssa, it's
I understand.
yeah, intent and organization. Yep, there we go.
By
There we
Scott
go.
Baker. Mhm.
All right, Professor Baker will be joining us. All right, so we are thankful that you all were here with us tonight. We will see you this coming Wednesday. Have a wonderful night. God bless. Bye-bye. Dismiss.
At 7:30.
7:30, everybody. 7:30. 7:30. All right. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.